This meeting is being recorded.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Krams are here, and it is time for a remastered listography of Pearl Jam. For anyone that doesn't know, when we call it remastered, that means that back in the day before Joe and Kram joined the channel, that I made a list of this band, and now we are redoing it as a trio. I don't know, is this the first remastered we've done where a band has released an album in between? I think it might be.
Yes. Because Zeppelin didn't, Beatles didn't, Cars didn't.
Right. So this time for sure my list won't be exactly the same because there's another album to get in there. I don't even remember what my old list was, and I haven't gone back and looked, so I don't know how much it's changed. I think it's probably pretty close to the same, but that'll be interesting to check out afterwards. So Pearl Jam, a band that I'm very familiar with. I know their first 9 albums like the back of my hand, basically know them inside and out. The 2 most recent, I haven't spent as much time with, probably only maybe a half a dozen listens each, or maybe even a little less. How about you guys?
Same. I know pretty much that all the way up till I'd say the first 8 then. Know them like the back of my hand. Didn't even really have to go back and look at them. I could probably list the track listing at a 95% accuracy for all of them. Seen them live before. I've been listening, I was into or heard 10 when it came out, had that album. I've pretty much gotten all their albums and listened to them as they've come out since the beginning. Like they were one of the earliest bands I remember enjoying because my parents liked them in the early 90s. And so, yeah, that's a few bands I know more than Pearl Jam.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with the band, their discography. I didn't really start listening to them on my own until later, maybe like 2000s. So I wasn't like a born with the grunge gene or anything, but I definitely got into them, seen them live, and yeah, pretty much all their albums. If you saw our 2020 list, you'll know that Gigaton was on my top 10 albums of the year. So take that however you want to take it, but I am familiar with Pearl Jam.
All right, they've got 11 studio albums now since Gigaton came out, so let's get into it. Who wants to start?
All right. Number 11, I think by a mile. This is the only Pearl Jam album I would rate lower than good. I would say this is a pretty lousy album. Lightning Bolt from 2013, I believe. Didn't care for this much. However, after the first 5 minutes, I thought it was really good because the leadoff track, Getaway, I really dug. But then other than that, Sirens maybe is decent, but I don't really care for this version of Pearl Jam. I think after Riot Act, they kind of got into this more casual surfer hard rock kind of style. It wasn't nearly as aggressive and as pungent. And this one to me is like the poppiest. It's really thick, big, expansive, kind of playful, which I don't really want in my Pearl Jam at all. Yeah, it's just kind of like this hardcore, sunny surfer kind of sound to it. But to me, it just comes off as really safe, pretty bland in every aspect. I don't think he sounds that great on it. Just not a lot for me here for Lightning Bolt. So number 11, I got Lightning Bolt.
For me, my number 11, and I think by far probably their least interesting record, I got Riot Act, which was 2002, came after Binaural. And this one's sort of, it's almost like Neil Young-less, directionless, sort of like late period, kind of just meanders all over the place, just not memorable, other than I Am Mine, which I really like. And I kind of think I had a higher opinion of this album because of how much I like that song. But everything else just totally just floats by without making any impact. I think, Bush Leaguer's kind of lame and cheesy. Love Boat Captain's okay. But there's 15 tracks on here. It's just too many, too directionless, too aimless, and nothing really connects with me on this one other than the great I Am Mine, phenomenal track, but everything else just doesn't do it.
My number 11 is going to be Lightning Bolt. I agree with Kram. I got it when it first came out, as I did with the previous several Pearl Jam records, but this one just never stuck. I listened to it maybe once or twice, and it went on the shelf, and revisited it for my first listography. Listened to it once or twice, put it back on the shelf, haven't listened to it since. So the only time I come back to this is when I'm ranking the Pearl Jam discography. And I don't know, I think for the several records, starting with the self-titled and then Backspacer, they were getting a little poppier and poppier, as Kram said. And I love those records, the two before it. I think they're awesome, but this one, I think the scale tips a little too far in that direction. I hate the way it's mixed. The bass is too heavy. The bass drowns out the guitars at times. And it's just bland. I hate to say it, but it's a little bit like a Foo Fighters record from around this same period. It's just bland, made for radio, generic rock and roll. And it's really disappointing because it's not like the radio is really, going to push this record anyways. So they might as well have just made something a little more interesting. So yeah, this is, I agree, the only Pearl Jam record that I would say is bad.
Good assessment, especially because I think when we used to talk about Pearl Jam leading up to that, we always kind of applauded them for doing whatever they wanted. Like, 10 was such a massive success. And, by the time Vitalogy came out just 3 years later, they sounded almost completely different because they wanted to. And, they do whatever the hell they want in live shows. They just do whatever the hell they want. And this one didn't feel that way at all for the first time. I feel the same way, but not nearly as much about my number 10, which is Backspacer. Lightning Bolt, like Jason said, was too much of that, but Backspacer has a pretty nice middle ground to that sound that they started to develop, more poppier sounding. And this one has a lot more heart. It's much more fun and it's much more emotional. Eddie is energetic, he's really scratchy right off the bat. And the songwriting's just better. I think they're in the mood to write these sort of songs where on Lightning Bolt it sound kind of forced. Got Some and The Fixer, pretty cool. Supersonic is nice. Not my favorite Pearl Jam, but I definitely think it's a good mile ahead of Lightning Bolt, even though they're almost kind of in the same vein. They just went too far with Lightning Bolt. And I think Backspacer is a pretty good listen, pretty accessible. And I think it's probably 15 minutes shorter than Lightning Bolt, which is exactly what I would want from this sound of Pearl Jam. So it's short and sweet, to the point, kind of hook driven, and a good listen. Number 10. They're not reinventing anything or being their most creative. It's not their best anything, but it's still a good listen. So number 10, I got Backspacer.
All right. For my number 10, I'm going back to 1996, an album that really sort of divided fans when it came out because, let's see, they just came out with Vitalogy 2 years previous. And, they're still riding that hot grunge streak, but I got No Code as my number 10. And, I don't think it's a bad album by any means. I think it's very interesting, but it's just not what I want from a Pearl Jam album, really. It's a little too sort of, they really wanted to make a statement that said, we're not just, the band you hear on the radio, the big, soaring grunge ballads and everything they've done so far. So kind of purposefully non-commercial. There's some weirder tracks on here, sort of following in sort of the vein of the end of Vitalogy, where it's sort of, kind of weird throwaway tracks kind of creeping into their big mainstream radio hits. You have songs like Lucan and a couple others that are just sort of weird. They're not kind of just not real songs, but sort of moods, little asides. I think the songs that are sort of in the Pearl Jam normal vein, like Hail Hail and Smile, which has a cool harmonica part, very sort of Neil Young-ish, are really good. The album's really percussive. Like, you really notice the drums on this one. Again, sort of trying not to be too commercial. And they kind of succeed in that because it's not what you kind of expected from Pearl Jam at this point. But I think it's good. I just don't connect with it very much. I'm missing those big soaring ballads and the hard rockers and the punky sort of stuff that they'd gotten into on Versus and Vitalogy. It's a fine album, but just doesn't quite work for me. I don't really listen to it ever. So No Code, my number 10.
All right, my number 10 is Riot Act. I largely agree with what Joe said about it. It is kind of aimless and meandering. The songs don't have that much that hook you into them. It's not a very like melodic record. It's the one album of theirs that sort of feels like they're being a little self-important or something. I don't know. I agree with most of their politics and I like what they're saying, but it's a little getting into that kind of U2 territory that I don't like. But the real issue with it is that it just doesn't have enough melody or things that hook you into the tunes. I don't think it's a bad record, and it has moments that I really like. I think Thumbing My Way is great, but on the whole, not one of my more favorite Pearl Jam efforts.
My number 10 is going to be, well, it was Backspacer. We're on a number 9 now, which is going to be the newest release, Gigaton, which I like a lot. I think it's pretty good. And it was a step in a different direction with the albums leading up to it. So that was really refreshing. And they did a little bit on Lightning Bolt, a little Backspacer, but this one's got a little bit more of, by no means a lot, but there's some loops in here. There's some background. There's some ambience. So like Dance of the Clairvoyants has like a nice kind of like definitely a different like background kind of, momentum with a loop behind it. Pretty good song. I think I got nothing really bad to say about this. I think it's really good. I think it's the best like pop hooks they've done in a while. The only thing I have is, and it's kind of like a give or take, like I want them to be a little more expansive than they had been leading up to this, which they are, but the album's like an hour long. I think it, like I don't want it trimmed, but I feel like it has to be trimmed a little bit. Some of the songs just are a few stanzas and verses too long, but at the same time I kind of want that. So I don't know, I'm a little indifferent on how to fix that, but I do think it's pretty good. Super Blood, Wolf Moon, Dance of the Clairvoyants, 7 o'clock. A lot of really good stuff here. Just not quite as good as the other stuff, and maybe a bit too long and a little too rambling with, some of the writing. But I think it's good. And I know Joe loved it. It was among his top 10 of 2020. But for me, number 9, Gigaton.
My number 9 is going to be the aforementioned Lightning Bolt, the two you had at your bottom. But I like this. I think I like all their albums. Riot Act's probably the only one I would consider not great. But I think Lightning Bolt's pretty strong. I didn't love Mind Your Manners when it first came out. Heard it on the radio a couple times. I kind of like it, though, in the context of the album. Sort of one of the faster, punkier efforts. There are a lot of ballads on this one, especially Sirens. And it's sort of, the back half, maybe a little too many of the slower ballads. I hadn't listened to it much when it came out, so going back to it, I liked it more than I kind of expected or thought I remembered liking it. So I think it's a solid album. Not too much to say about it. I think it could be a little catchier, a little hookier, and it's not quite as good as the ones that preceded it, the self-titled and Backspacer, but I think it's a pretty solid effort.
All right, my number 9, I'm with Kram. It is Gigaton. I think it's way, way better than Lightning Bolt. Obviously, don't like it as much as Joe because it made his top 10 and it missed my top 100. But I do think it's good. I feel like this could end up being kind of a transitional record for them because they're trying a lot of different stuff out. And it doesn't really feel like a cohesive record that much as it does is just kind of a bunch of experiments. And I think maybe with their next album, maybe they'll take one of these paths and expand on it and see where it goes. So that'll be interesting to see. Yeah, like Kram said, it's good. I like it. There's a lot of good stuff on it. It just doesn't feel as essential or as much like a complete artistic statement as some of their other records. It just feels more like a collection of tracks to me, but a good collection of tracks. So not a bad record.
Well said, dude. All right, my number 8 is going to be Pearl Jam self-titled, or Avocado, if you like. This is the album that was touring when Joe and I saw them. Couldn't really tell you which songs they played on here because they played about 50 friggin' songs. They played Forever, which was awesome. But this album, I think, is really good. It has kind of dipped for me a little bit since it's come out. and that might just because I listen to them. I still listen to them a good bit, Pearl Jam. The other albums, but since I'm listening to them less than I did like 10 years ago, when I get around to like the albums I've got in my top 5, I really start to elevate those. And this one kind of dips a little bit. It's really awesome, especially in contrast to Riot Act, which came right before. This one, they're taking themselves much less seriously. They're almost, Riot Act, I think they approached from like a really, like Jason was saying, a political standpoint. Everyone around that time wanted to comment on terrorism and the state of America and blah, blah, blah. And this one, they were just like, you know what, we're just a rock band. Let's go out. And it's got a lot of really nice variety on it. It's kind of like, feels like a greatest hits of like their last kind of 3 or 4 albums. Because it's got a little bit of everything. It's got some percussive elements from like No Code, some really nice like traveling songwriting from like Yield, some of the punkiness from Binaural. And the songs are just really, really good. And I think especially it's got kind of like a dramatic element to it. Plays almost like it's like a Who album, like a Poor Man's Quadrophenia almost. And I think he's starting to sing a little bit more. I like Riot Act a good bit, so I'll be talking about that later. But I would say that's probably one of his worst vocal albums. This one, he's kind of being Eddie Vedder again, which I really like. Really great classic Pearl Jam songs for me now. And I think in general, Pearl Jam, having been around for 30 years now, is kind of one of those newly inducted like classic rock bands. I think Pearl Jam is like a classic rock band now, depending on how you want to genreify that. But I think they are worthy of it. They've been around forever. And I think a lot of these songs measure up to some of their greatest, like Marker in the Sand, Parachutes. I think Life Wasted and Worldwide Suicide were a good song. Really good listen, start to finish. And I'd love to have it higher, but I'm very familiar with Pearl Jam and I'm very familiar with a lot of their albums, quite a lot. So my number 8, Avocado, or self-titled.
Okay, my number 8. And this one, I really love half of this album. And that makes sense because it's titled Binaural, but it's a tale of two halves for me. It starts out so strong with Breaker Fall and God's Dice, Evacuation Light Years, Nothing As It Seems, are all classic Pearl Jam tracks in my mind. But after that, I almost skip the rest of the album every time. Thin Air and Insignificance are okay, but after that, I have almost no memory of any of those songs. I went back and listened to them again, and they just kind of meander around. Nothing interesting, nothing hooky. Real atmospheric, dark. The whole album's pretty dark. This was the first one with Matt Cameron on drums, and he's a phenomenal drummer. I think he adds plenty to the rhythm section. He also wrote Evacuation, but after that first half, it just doesn't hold me at all, and which is a shame because the first half is spectacular. I love sort of the punkiness of Breaker Fall and God's Dice. The moodiness of Nothing As It Seems is really cool. Really nothing like they had done before. Light Years is a nice, pretty ballad. So plenty of good stuff on here, just not quite a whole complete album in my mind. So Binaural is my number 8.
That surprises me. I thought that would be really high for you.
It would be if the first half was the second half was as good as the first half. It could be in the top 3.
All right, my number 8 is going to be Backspacer. And even though I only have it at number 8, I feel like I like this album more than most Pearl Jam fans. I really enjoy it. Parachutes and Comeback are kind of expanded into a full album in a way. It's a lot more melodic, more singer-songwriter-y in some ways, but it still has a lot of good rockers too. I think it's a nice balance. The Fixer is great. Really, really good song. Amongst the Waves has one of Mike McCready's best guitar solos. There's a lot of good stuff on it. I think it's really good, and a lot of earworms on this record. Really gets stuck in your head. Got this when it first came out, played it a ton, loved it. Ranked it pretty highly in the year it was released. I enjoy it a lot. I just think they've got 7 that are better. Number 8.
All right, my number 7 is going to be No Code, which I think is awesome. I will say that the thing that I think hurts it the most in my list is that the live versions of this song are better than the album versions. Even though I love the weird production on the album, they've got 6,000 live records. So you can find versions of these songs that are a little more straightforward. And I think it elevates the songwriting. Like on a song like In My Tree or Off He Goes, really amazing stuff. But I do really appreciate how experimental it is, especially with what they were leading up to. I think it's an album that they focus maybe a little too much on the music and the sound and the style. When the first album's poured out with just a lot of pain and a lot of raw emotion, this one was much more pensive and provocative. And, you know, I think they tried to make this album where I think maybe the other albums just kind of flushed out a little bit more naturally. And I don't want to say it hurt them, but maybe it hurt them. I don't want to say hurt's not the right word, but not what my favorite versions of Pearl Jam are. But I mean, not really a bad track on here. Joe hates little asides. I think Lucan's pretty cool. But yeah, I think really the main thing for me that keeps it maybe a couple slots down is just I've heard better versions than the album itself. So No Code for me, and number 7.
My number 7 is going to be the Avocado Pearl Jam self-titled. Very strong comeback from Riot Act. It really brings back sort of that classic Pearl Jam, you know, twin guitar led attack that they'd really kind of gotten away from on Riot Act, and even Binaural and parts of Yield sort of moving away from that sort of big grungy sound. And I think this is a nice return to that. You know, you have these albums sort of later in artists' careers that's harkens back to their glory days, so to speak. And I think it's important for bands to kind of spread out and do other stuff like they did on Yield and Riot Act and Binaural. But it's always nice to hear kind of those comebacks. And whether or not it's successful is a different matter. But I think Pearl Jam really gets back to the heart of what made them so popular in the first place on this one. The two singles, Worldwide Suicide and Life Wasted, I think are really strong. Like everyone else is saying, Parachutes is great, Big Wave is cool, Mark in the Sand is cool. It's just a really good album. I mean, there's nothing out of the blue or out of the box. You know, they're totally capable of making albums like this. It's sort of just, you know, like riding a bike. They just had to get back to the basics, and I think they nailed it. I think it's all really good. I think Eddie Vedder sounds great. I think the whole band sounds fantastic, and just a really good sort of, you know, back to basics album. All these artists have them, and Pearl Jam seems to be very good at it, and they'll continue. I think their hot streak, in my mind. I mean, it's interesting to see you guys have sort of their glory first albums all above their later stuff, and doesn't look like I have the same rankings. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where all the rest of these lay out.
It seems like there's a bunch of albums none of us have talked about yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, it looks like we all have the classics at the top, but, you know, I had Riot Act and Binaural pretty low, No Code pretty low. Some of the albums that are in the, so to speak, glory days of Pearl Jam, but I really, you know, I think their comeback after No Code, starting with the self-titled, is stronger than it has any right to be, and stronger than what most bands could pull off kind of that stage of their career.
All right, so should be reiterated before I get into my next pick that Pearl Jam, I think in my mind, have 9 very, very good albums, maybe 10. No, 9. I think 9. So no matter what I put at number 7, it's going to be a very good album.
People are going to be pissed, Jason. Don't say it. Don't do it.
But
That's why I put this up. I feel like it's coming. And you were just talking about the Jason is an Idiot t-shirt. Well, we might have to start printing it.
It's not 10. 10's not at my number 7. It's Versus. I think the highs on this record are awesome. Go is awesome. Animal, Dissident, Leash, some of their best rock tracks. They're really, really good. But there's also a fair amount of lowlights on this record. WMA, Rats, Blood. These tracks are just all right. They came close to outdoing themselves after 10, but the end product just feels a little bit off to me. It's not a sophomore slump by any means, but it feels a little boxed in, a little stuck by the success of 10. Like they weren't really sure where to go from there. It's a great record. Don't get me wrong. I love it. It's really great, but I do think the other 6 are all better than it.
Joe's face. Joe, where did Versus fall for you in 93?
It was a runner-up.
I think I talked about it, but I don't remember it making my top 5.
It was there with Smashing Pumpkins as runners-up.
All right. My number 6, you guys are dead wrong about Riot Act. Your descriptions were correct, but you're just not giving it enough credit. It is kind of like this dusty, broken down, Neil Young-ish, like hard folk sound. But I think it's awesome. I do like that they're a little more, or not apprehensive at all about the statement of the album. I think there's just a really cool Americana vibe on this that Yield has a little bit, but this has it in a different soundscape. A lot of more like hard acoustic, just kind of rusty sounding drums. It's got like a rootsy feel to it. Admittingly, it's too long, and probably after Green Disease, Help Help, Bush Leaguer, Half Full, a lot of these tracks aren't nearly as good, but I'd say the tracks 1 through Get Right are really good, and it's a different style of drumming for Cameron. It's kind of like, No Code meets Vitalogy a little bit. There's a lot more of just kind of soft drumming and different patterns. Can't Keep is a really cool opener. Love Boat Captain, they used opening a lot of shows with, I believe. That's awesome. Ghost, I Am Mine, Thumbing My Way, You Are. I think all these songs are really, really good. I Don't Get the Hate. I think it's great. I think also around this time, didn't make the album, they did Man of the Hour for the Big Fish soundtrack. It's got a little bit of that same feel and style to it. And I thought this kind of is like a one-off sound for them, and I think it was really good. I don't get the hate for it. I think it's awesome. Riot Act, number 6.
All right, well, I can't agree with Kramser on Riot Act, but I think this next one on my list, I think we all agree is pretty darn good. Backspacer is my number 6. And this one kind of surprised me at how good it was. I kind of had forgotten about it a little bit. Came out in 2009, so it was the one after the self-titled. It just has a energy about it. I think it's maybe their punkiest record, definitely since Versus or Vitalogy. There's no filler on this album. There's no bad songs. I really like The Fixer when it came out. It was on rock radio. It was, it's fun. It has those hand claps, some nice guitar licks. It just seemed like the self-titled was a good kind of comeback, and this was like comeback plus, the band sounds like they're really having fun. Sounds like they're youthful, revitalized. The songs are shorter, they're faster, not too many ballads, not too many sort of mopey, middle-aged, slow songs. It's kind of, 36 minutes. I think Kramser had mentioned how kind of quick it was, how short, right to the point, not a lot of wasted space on this one. Another mid-era, late era album where it all connects. It's all working again. And I think the band sounds great. I think Eddie sounds great. I like his singing style when he kind of gets that punkier, sort of less, I like 10 and I like the big grunge anthems, but on this one, he's just kind of like flying through stuff. Not that mopey grunge kind of trap that, some of these bands sometimes fall into. I think he's lively and energetic, and it shows throughout the music and the songs, and it's really good. I'm surprised it got this high on my list, but after listening to it a couple more times doing this listography, it just kept rising up higher and higher. So number 6, Backspacer.
Right, my number 6 is No Code, an album that I like a lot. It's a pretty difficult and challenging record. It's really them kind of, really blowing up what Pearl Jam was and taking a sharp left turn, kind of them hitting the pause on their massive success of their first 3 records and kind of taking a step back and kind of saying to themselves, like, how can we keep doing this forever without the wheels coming off here? It's really awesome, really different. If it catches me in just the right mood, there are times where I think that this might be their best album. But generally, I just sort of think of it as kind of this transitional record that kind of bridges the gap between the early period where they were massive grunge superstars and the later period where they're kind of just rock and roll lifers doing their thing, and their hardcore fans follow along and listen to everything they do, but the general public is maybe less interested. But it's great. Lots of good songs, a lot of quiet moments on this record that are really good, even more so than on their previous records. Kind of introspective, and like I think both of you guys said, very percussive at times. I believe Jeremy Irons is the drummer on this record. But yeah, really good record. Like it a lot. Very underrated, but maybe not a record for everybody. But I think, among hardcore Pearl Jam fans, I think a record that is considered, one of their better.
Yeah, and especially like if I go see them live again, there's a lot of songs on this album I'd want to hear. And it's interesting that even though there are touches of the No Code sound sprinkled up and expanded their arsenal, they never made another album like it to me at all. So pretty interesting. All right, my number 5. You ready to grin and bear it, Joe? It's going to be Versus. Great album. But Jason hit it on the money that there are just too many tracks that hold it back. Glorified G doesn't belong on this album at all. It's way too perky. The chorus might be their worst chorus ever. It sounds like a Sheryl Crow song or something. I don't know. It's not working for me. WMA is okay. Blood, Rats, Leash, Indifference is an amazing closer. So I again, using the word great. Actually, I'll say really great album, but they've got masterpieces ahead of it. This one misses it because those songs hold it back. And I think it doesn't, I mean, it's not a sophomore slump, but 10 is better and it sounds better. They stripped it down a little bit here, but there's not, other than that, there's nothing really wrong with it. They're still got those heavy anthemic melodic grunge things that McCready soars through, and Eddie sounds great belting it out. Just, if you did a songs list of like their first 5 albums or first 4, your bottom 3 or 4 for me are all on this album, and that's kind of what holds it back. So it's really great. It's just not a masterpiece or quite as great as I think some other albums are. So Versus, number 5, very strong, Joe. So strong, number 5, so strong.
Oh, I have so many things I want to say right now, but I'm not going to say it. I'm going to get on to my next album. I'm going to hold the venom for when I talk about Versus, which will be much, much later. Might not even be on this show. Might even be on another show entirely, because it's so good that it's so far ahead. No, I'm kidding. My number 5 is Gigaton, and maybe a little recency bias comes in on this one a little bit, maybe. Really liked it. Top 10 this year. And just going through this list and listening to all these albums again and again, I think almost everything except Riot Act is a great album. There's just so little difference between my 5 and my 10. It's almost all interchangeable. I don't think any of these records are perfect, but they're pretty much all candidates for top 10. So I don't know. I really like Gigaton. I think it's a nice, as much as Backspacer had some of that punky Versus energy, I think Gigaton has some of that 10 anthemic energy, but it also has some songs, like Krams was saying before, that really have never come into play. Styles like on Dance of the Clairvoyance, where it is, there's a loop and it's real slow building, but it's got this, like, I don't even know what kind of energy to describe it as. I've heard people say it's like a Talking Heads meets Pearl Jam song, which I don't know if I buy that, but there's this sort of energy from that period maybe throughout it, late 70s, early 80s, which I think is cool. I think Superblood Wolf Moon's a nice up-tempo, almost something you could find on Versus. Quick Escape has that sort of insane sounding Eddie Vedder, which I really like, where he's just, right on the precipice of going completely nuts. It is a little long. I think it's a little self-indulgent, but they've, it's been 7 years since their last album, so I'm sure they wanted to cram in as many of the ideas as they could. I like the synths, the little key flourishes, touches here and there. I think they could, like Jason said, go in a lot of different directions from this. I like it a lot. Maybe it'll fall back a little bit in 5 years when we do the remastered special edition of Pearl Jam. But for right now, today, it is my number 5.
All right, my number 5 is 10. This probably the hardest one to place. On one hand, it's amazing. It's an almost perfect record. It's got a bunch of killer classic hits of theirs that have been radio staples since this album came out. The deep cuts are all really good too, like Porch, Once, and Release. On the other hand, it suffers some from burnout. I've heard it way too much. And also, I think their evolution beyond this sound is what really makes them great and really what I think of when I think of Pearl Jam. I don't think of this record that often. So it was really hard to decide where to put it. It's amazing. Like I said, it's an almost perfect record, a classic, but going by my standard of which one am I going to play the most often, not probably this one. So number 5 for me is 10.
Well, you're not wrong in the assessment that the casual rock listener doesn't realize how great Pearl Jam is, because you think of 10 and then the radio hits up Versus and Vitalogy and kind of nothing else gets radio play. But that's too low for 10, my friend. It's just too low, but it is great. I realize we're talking, still, you said damn near perfect, and the only disagreement I have would be it's perfect. My number 4 is going to be Binaural, easily their most underrated record. At its first glance, it's just a kick-ass downhill rock, hard rock, grunge album. Doesn't really let its foot off the gas. Even the slower stuff has really a lot of intensity to it. Star of the show here, though, is Matt Cameron. Never really does anything flashy, but just keeps everything rolling, knows exactly when to get on the ride, when to, fill in with the tons. He's just a master of rock drumming, I think, and it shows in the live work, and it really shows on this album, especially on a song like Grievance. Kind of takes you through the parts just perfectly. I think the first album of this is kick-ass, and then I think it saturates a little bit in the middle into the end, which I actually think the second half of this album is even better than the first, but it's close. So I think that's got it going for it. I think songwriting is really underrated. It's got that aggression back. I think Yield and No Code were really kind of pretty and provocative, and this one's just kind of painful and mean again. It just conjures up grit and just, fast guitars, and it's badass. Listen to the album if you haven't, and check out the DVD, which we've mentioned before, Touring Band before, which a lot of these songs are on, and they're just great live rock and roll songs. It's simple. It's one of the most simple records they've done maybe ever. It's just badass. It's great. Really shocked Joe didn't have it higher. I believe Jason has not talked about it yet, so maybe he's with me. It's badass. It's a 4.5 out of 5 for me. I think it's that good. It's fantastic. Binaural, number 4 in the Pearl Jam catalog.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Binaural fan, but I think it's clearly far below their big 4. It just doesn't have the same staying power. But you guys can think whatever you want. My number 4, and this is sort of there's a pretty sizable leap between Gigaton and this one, which is Yield. And it took me a while to really like this album. After something like 10 Verses and Vitalogy, I guess technically it's after No Code, but after sort of those loud, aggressive records, this one really kind of cuts back. Even, they have their ballads with Elderly Woman and Nothing Man, but this, the whole sound of this album is really far removed, I think, from anything they had done up until this point. You still get, the very close to punk, Do the Evolution and Brain of Jay, that kind of insane energy, the howling of Eddie Vedder on Do the Evolution is pretty amazing, what he does with his voice on that. And then there's, songs like Faithful and Given to Fly and Wishless and Pilot, where it's just it's almost like a different band. They sound so much more mature, so much more kind of laid back. The instrumental work is still great. Songwriting's still great. It's a little more contemplative, I think. But that sort of grunge like aggression seems to be stripped out of this one, which I don't know if this turned off fans when it came out or not, but I think this one kind of gets forgotten about, maybe. It came out in 98, not a great year. in the middle of new metal and a whole bunch of other terrible pop music. So this was sort of a downturn after this album as far as critical and sort of commercial appeal. But this is definitely a cool album. Shows off a lot of what they can do without that grunginess. It's a great album. So yeah, number 4, Yield.
My number 4 is the self-titled album, Avocado. I love this record. I think it's great. A huge comeback after what was the disappointing Riot Act for me. High energy. It's kind of punky and explosive, but it still has really big hooks. I think Kram nailed it when he said it was kind of had the Who influence. I actually have that written down. Definitely hear a lot of that in this record. Parachutes has almost like a Beatle-esque melody. It's just a really, really great combination of their louder, faster side and this more melodic sensibility, which was kind of new on this record. The two sides work together so well. I think it's just like the perfect balance for them. Really good record, really good songs. I think the writing's good. Everything about it's good. I like all of it. Every track on it is solid.
And you love avocados and guacamole, you son of a bitch. Forgot to mention that. You love Mexican food. It's your favorite. Admit it.
I love Mexican food.
There you have it. When we eventually get to our listography of cuisines and food styles. Spoiler. That's right.
We're agreeing.
You're like the Riddler meets avocado. Well done. You look great. My number 3, 3, 2, and 1. So we're all clear how I feel about Pearl Jam as an upcoming all-time list. All 3, 5 out of 5 stars. Masterpieces. Albums I'll listen to for the rest of my life. Albums I'll be pissed off if my kids don't like. All album of the year contenders. Number 3, Vitalogy. Hard to pinpoint this one. It's kind of hard rock, punk, but still kind of crazy and staggering. Their version is really cool because it seems like sometimes their mind is really lost on like an opener like Last Exit, Spin the Black Circle, really frantic, jagged stuff that really works. Then you've got just like some of the best purely written grunge songs ever. They're from a grunge band, but Nothing Man, Better Man, just beautiful friggin' songs, just amazing songs. Immortality is great. There's some weird kind of experimental stuff in the middle with like Bugs. Corduroy is badass. It's just a really cool album, really cool sound. It's heavy, but it's got like a really thin sonic quality to it. Like a little bit of fuzz, but the way it's mixed is just like really nice, just like icing on everything. Put together so well. It's got just a really nice rainbow of emotions. It's angry and delicate in some styles. Not wrong to have it at number 1. It's an easy 5 out of 5. I think for the first time compared to the first 2 albums, McCready is really using his guitar to tell the story of the songs, to just accent the songs, not as much flourishing, just like bashing guitar work that he can do. He's a little more restraint here, but it's awesome. I think Vitalogy is one of the best albums of the 90s, one of the best albums ever. Number 3 for me.
Also, number 3 for me. Great album. Really shows off the diversity, I think, more than maybe any of their albums. You have the quiet ballad, Nothing Man. You have the real alternative ballad sort of rocker and Better Man. And then you have the weird stuff, Tremor Christ has this awesome bass line. Not For You, sort of in the grunge stratosphere, but not quite. When they almost have moved on from that grunge sound at this point. Corduroy might be the only one that sort of harkens back to 3 years ago with 10. So in just a couple of years, they'd made huge strides as far as their sound goes. The only thing that holds it back for me is the kind of the weird stuff like Bugs. Hey, Foxy Mop Handle Mama, That's Me, aka Stupid Mop, is a terrible closer, just awful. I Dub Anita, not great. Satan's Bed, kind of weird. Take those out, and it's pretty much a perfect album. And just slightly behind my top 2. But there's just so much on here. I think Nothing Man's probably their best slow, touching ballad sort of song. I think they really peaked as far as that goes on with that one. Yeah, I mean, it's just a great album. Although it didn't make my 94 list because 94 is stacked, but it's good. It's good.
Interesting that their third album is all of our number threes. Vitalogy is my number 3 as well. I don't have too much more to add. You guys pretty much nailed it, except I think those weird songs are part of what makes it great. It's another one of those instances where these weird tracks that you wouldn't listen to on their own just add to the whole experience of the record. I think it's really cool. It's dark, it's different, it's pushing the limits of what their sound can be and where they can take things without alienating their fan base. They still had massive success with this, big hits with Better Man and Corduroy and Nothing Man. Just a really great record. My number 3.
All right, my number 2 is going to be Ten, their best sounding record to me. I think the drums, the atmosphere, the bass. Eddie's voice on this and on verses are the best he's ever sounded because it's a lot not higher pitch, but just crystal clear and really powerful. I mean, he's always got power, but I feel like it's a little muddier after the first 2. And right here, there's a little more reverb on it. It just sounds so good. Some of my best vocal moments ever in the history of music are found in this album. But I think what stands out for this is just kind of like the classic grunge, angry sound. And this is by far the best in-your-face guitar work combo. Gossard doesn't get enough credit. The way him and McCready play off each other on this album is just fantastic. We haven't heard this sort of rhythm lead companionship since maybe Aerosmith or something like that. That's so good. It's just phenomenal on the classics like Even Flow and Alive. There's not a bad song on here. It would easily be my number 1 if another album didn't exist. But I am not sick of the big radio hits at all whatsoever. I can hear Even Flow, Alive, Black, Jeremy, all this stuff all the time. Why Go is so cool. Once is awesome. Oceans is so underrated. Release, when me and Joe saw them, they opened with Release, which was so cool. Yeah, the vibe, just like the weird, ominous, venomous vibe of this, the anger that's just like so explosive is so good on this. We talk a lot about it. I think we all had it in the vicinity of a winner. Joe had it as a winner in 91. Good call. Nothing to complain about this. Hold dear to my heart from my childhood too. I would probably venture to guess it is one of my top 25 most listened records in my life. There are very few records I've heard more than this. It's got to be in like the 150 to 200 range. Like, swear to God, so much. Used to have it on repeat. Like, as soon as I got my license, it was one of the ones that just went over and over again. It's that good. Believe the hype. So good. 10 by Pearl Jam. My number 2.
Yes, it rules. It is my number 1 because my number 2 is going to be Versus. I think you guys are just insane when you talk about this one. I think it's just unbelievable all the way through. I love Go. I love Animal. I love Daughter. I love Glorified G. I love Dissident. I think Rats is awesome. Unbelievable bass line on that one. Just awesome playing on this one. 10 is so big and just, wide open into the mystic kind of thing. This one is so aggressive and angry at times, but also beautiful. They've worked in their first real pretty ballad with Elderly Woman and Daughter, but stuff like Animal and Blood is just, his voice is at Eddie Vedder's voice is just at a whole other level with the aggression, the screaming. I think it's their punkiest by far. I think it's their most aggressive. And I think it sounds different. It's such a sea change from 10 to this one. You can't really even hear the grunge, maybe on something like Rearview Mirror, but everything else sounds so different. This is a little more alternative, a little less commercial, a little less sheen on this one. This album, Krams was talking about songs maybe on this one not making top 10 lists, but I pretty much had the entire album in the considerations. So I guess we just hear this one a lot different because it's real close to beating out 10. I couldn't quite do it, but I think this is just it's a shade. It's a tiny little shade behind 10 on my list.
Yeah, it's great. I would give it 4.5 out of 5. I do hear it different. I don't think it is as angsty as 10. I don't think it's as dark and brooding. Like I think Dissident is a little brighter than anything on 10. Rearview Mirror is a little more of just like a brighter rock song. Other than Go and Animal and Blood, I mean, definitely hear it there. I mean, those songs could probably be on 10 as well. But yeah, I think it's a little softer than 10, at least with its like aggressive emotion. But I still love it, dude. Dude, I still love it.
I mean, it's more angry, I think, but it's less of that grunge sort of dark sound. It's definitely a little closer to alternative, I think, than like the grunginess of 10.
My number 2 is Binaural, a record that I absolutely love. The first Pearl Jam record that I ever got was The Yield. So this was the first one that I was eagerly anticipating, got it on release day. Didn't immediately win me over. It took a few listens, but the more I played it, the more I loved it. It comes blasting out of the gate with some like really strong, fast rockers. And then it does slow down a little. It gets a little weird, and that's where it loses Joe, but I love the rest of the record. I think it's really interesting, cool songwriting, cool atmosphere with the guitar, interesting playing on it. I love the vibe of the whole record. I think it sounds a little bit different than anything else in their catalog. But yeah, just a lot of really, really good songs start to finish.
Yeah, and I think other than 10, this is the next best Stone and McCready combo of playing off each other. Like the songs are very guitar driven and the rocks. All right, number 1, Yield. This is the number 1, edging out 10 for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's their best songwriting. Number 2, this album, for a rock album, has immaculate balance, almost like the prototype of how I want a rock album to operate in sequence. Like Brain of J, hell of an opener, punky, awesome, faithful, really cool, slowed down a little bit, but keeps you really interested. Then you get into the middle with the first quarter with Given to Fly and Wishless and Pilot, which is just immaculate songwriting, really like low lit and beautiful and temperate. And then you get right back on like side 2, kind of with Do the Evolution, firing up, also known as Color Red, is awesome. MFC, then it really just kind of brings you back down to earth at the end with gorgeous songs like Low Light, In Hiding, Push Me, Pull Me. All those Yesterdays is a great closer. And I think it's just the best batch of songs they got from start to finish. The writing is just perfect on here. It's a great, like, we were talking about how I thought Riot Act had like that Americana feel. I kind of get that vibe from here too, especially because now Pearl Jam is by now kind of like just part of American rock scene, that they're doing all of their best tricks here. And I think it's great. The band, the playing on it here is really tactful and tuneful, and everything that we talk about a lot here on the channel serves the songs perfectly. And with just, even with a song like Low Light or Pilot, stripped down kind of sound, just a rock and roll band, but they're able to create these vastly different moods in these songs without really changing the sound. It just comes across in the writing perfectly. By the time you're watching this video, you know it didn't win 1998, but it was my second runner-up and a perfect 5 out of 5 score for me. I think it's great. Nothing to complain about here. Yield, number 1 for me.
Well, everybody knows my number 1's 10. That should have been pretty obvious. 91 winner. And it's just, it's hard to even fathom that this was a debut album by anybody. And it's sort of cheating because most of Pearl Jam had already been in Mother Love Bone. They appeared on Temple of the Dog. Eddie Vedder was on Temple of the Dog. So there's no awkward, adjustment here. It's just straight out the gate, phenomenal, huge, massive songwriting, mostly from, Stone Gossard wrote most of the tracks. Jeff Ament wrote some of them too, but, this is sort of a different, people think of Pearl Jam, they think of this album usually, most people, casual listeners probably, but it really doesn't sound all that much like any of their other albums. It's so big and anthemic. Tracks like Jeremy just kind of unfold slowly. It's very classic rock sort of structures. You got that unbelievable killer opening to Even Flow with the dual guitars. The intro to Alive, it all sounds like 70s classic rock, takes you right back. A pretty much perfect record. There's no down points. There's no sort of asides. There's no weird little things. It's just super track after super track. All the hits are great. I think they deserve their reputation. You can still hear them all on the radio, Even Flow, Alive, Once, Jeremy, Black. But the other songs, Porch and Garden and Why Go and Deep, even Release, sort of almost like a palate cleanser at the end of the album, 9 minutes long. But on this, I think it works after all the aggression and energy. And it's pretty much as perfect as it gets. There's not a lot more to say. You can go turn on the radio. You'll probably hear something from it, and you can revel in its greatness.
Yeah, I like how you were talking about how it sounds like it could have been a classic rock album. And it's weird. Like this, it sounds like it should have been an album that they built up to, like instead of being their debut. Everything's so big and so soaring. It's like a Seattle arena rock sound, and it's awesome.
It's weird how grunge sort of, you think of a certain connotation, but all the grunge bands really didn't sound much alike. This doesn't sound anything like Nirvana, and Nirvana didn't sound anything like Soundgarden. So it's weird. Grunge sort of encompasses everything.
All right. My number 1 is Yield. And speaking of records that sound like classic rock records, I think this one even more so. If No Code was a record of like this growth and rediscovering themselves, then I think Yield is sort of them taking what they found through that process and getting really comfortable with it, and then just writing a ton of amazing songs. All of their influences like come together here seamlessly, but it pretty much doesn't sound exactly like any of them. It's a really, I think, maybe the first record where Pearl Jam is its own sound. I mean, maybe you could argue that with earlier records, but I think all of their influences were being worn on their sleeve in a more obvious way on the earlier records. The songs are great. They're immediate. This first time you hear them, they're catchy, they're infectious. I think his lyric writing on this record is some of the best lyrics he's ever written. And it's the first one I ever bought. So I have that sort of, putting it in a special place in my mind as well. There's a certain nostalgia factor to it for me, but I do think that it is legitimately their best record. I think it's awesome. Yield, number 1.
Unfortunately, by far the worst album cover. It's just, it doesn't do it for me.
I don't know about
love
that.
it. It's simple and obvious.
I don't know.
I like the cutout, so when you fold it open, it's cool. I like it.
Yeah, I don't mind the cover. I think Pearl Jam has pretty decent covers, all in all. Versus is my favorite.
Their worst cover, I think, is Riot Act.
Yeah, you were saying that Yield is like where they got the Pearl Jam sound. I'd probably argue that was on Vitalogy, but this, and so I kind of think Yield is sometimes like Vitalogy 2 in a way, but slightly better than Vitalogy. But I know what you're saying. All right, what do we think of Pearl Jam as a whole, boys?
They rule. They're incredibly good, incredibly long lasting, without much dip in quality at all, which is probably the hardest thing for any rock band to do, is to keep up quality throughout the years. And I'm notorious for hating anything out of a classic period. I almost always have the later albums just, amongst the wreckage down at the bottom of my lists. But I was surprised at how good all of these albums sound. All of them hold up. I think they're just one of the best probably rock bands of all time, really. I don't think you can say it any other way. I think they've proved it time and time again, and I don't see them slowing down.
They're among my favorite artists ever. Obviously, they've got 3 albums that I think are 5 out of 5, a couple more that are 4.5 out of 5. That's pretty hard to do for an artist. And I think of that grunge label, they're easily my favorite because of the longevity and because they operate outside of that realm, like beyond Vitalogy, with such interesting stuff. Amazing band to see live. They're also, they don't have a reputation of being tools, or like they don't get in a lot of problems. They're very fan friendly. And it really ticks me off that people associate shittier music that came after with like the Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder sound. So unfair. Alice in Chains is there too, that they don't deserve the, bands that were influenced by them that are just terrible. Pearl Jam, you know, anyone can do that Eddie Vedder impression and be like, oh, you know, I hate Creed or blah, blah, blah sounds, and I hate Pearl Jam. Don't belong lumped together whatsoever. Pearl Jam they just don't deserve it. It's very unfair for that, and it ticks me off.
Of the big four grunge bands, Pearl Jam, easily my favorite of the four. It bothers me when people say they don't like Eddie Vedder's voice. I get it. He spawned a million copycats and the whole yarling thing or whatever people call it. I think he does so many different things with his voice throughout their catalog and changes it and manipulates it in a lot of different ways. I think he's a great singer, and I think they're a great band, and I really respect them for not sort of settling for the success they had and just riding it out. I think they really pushed themselves to find different and interesting avenues to pursue. Even if you watch the Pearl Jam 20 doc, they talk about feeling like around the time of Versus and Vitalogy that they didn't have any cred and they struggled with their identity and wanting to incorporate different elements that they were influenced by. So kudos to them for just sticking to their guns and doing what they wanted to do.
Yeah, and they're always paying homage to classic rock artists. I mean, they don't hide their love for The Who or Neil Young or anybody. And good Lord, is Mike McCready an underrated guitar player? He's so good.
All right, so that does it for ranking the albums. Let us know how you rank them down below and what you think of our lists. Make sure you hit the like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell so you get notifications when new videos come out. Check the description for links to all of our social media accounts, and check back tomorrow for our top 10 Pearl Jam songs. Thanks for watching.